I wanted to bring to you and to offer you something from the children of Soweto in South Africa. And this was at the Festival of Children, and this is sung by the storytellers of Soweto. So when I saw that there was so much of hip-hop in the program and so much of beauty and aesthetic, which I think is so important, that we not only speak truth to power, but we speak beauty and ethics to power, I chose this for you, and I'm going to read it for you. It's from the storytellers of Soweto. We have entered the night to tell our tale, to listen to those who have not spoken. We who have seen our children die in the morning deserve to be listened to. We have looked on blankly as they have opened their wounds. Nothing really matters except the grief of the children. Their tears must be revered, and their inner silence speaks louder than the spoken word. And all being and all of life shouts out in outrage. We must not be rushed to our truths. Whatever we have failed to say is stored secretly in our minds, and all those processions of embittered crowds have seen us read them 1,000 times. We can hear the story over and over and over again. Our minds are muted beyond sadness. There is nothing more that we can fear. We live, friends, women and men who will bring testimony to the court, members of the jury, those of you who will speak as expert analysts in the round tables. We live in violent times, times in which our collective and community memories are dying, times in which our dreams are turning into never-ending nightmares, and the future increasingly fragmenting. Times that are collapsing the many life visions into one cosmology, into a single cosmology that has created its own universal truths: equality, development, peace. And these truths are inherently discriminatory, even violent. Times that have created the globalized world order that dispossesses the majority, that desacralizes nature, that destroys whole cultures and civilizations. I'm thinking of the indigenous in the US, that denigrates the women. Times in which the war on terrorism, a la Pax Americana, brings a time of violent uncertainty and of brutal wars. The wars for resources, for oil, diamonds, minerals, uranium now, the wars of occupation. A state terrorism that through its development models and through its technological choices and more through its wars and weapons culture, times that are giving us new words. Preemptive strike, collateral damage, it simply means women and children and men killed. Embedded journalism, enemy combatants, rendition, military tribunals, drones, unmanned drones. These are new words, friends, because we are living in new and more violent times. But these new words are words soaked in blood. Times in which the political thinking and the institutions and instruments of justice are hardly able to redress the violence that is not only escalating but also intensifying. Times that presuppose the genocide of the many, the gendercide of women. Times in which progress presupposes, when we speak of progress, but it really means the genocide of the many, the gendercide of women. Times in which human rights have come to mean the rights of the powerful and the rights of the privileged. And that for the masses to have their human rights, they have to surrender the most fundamental human right of all, and that is their right to be human. Times in which, friends, the political spaces for the other is diminishing, even closing. It would seem that the world is at the end of its imagination, because the old categories, the old concepts are hardly able to grasp the violence of the times. When we think of poverty, poverty is no longer able to grasp the destitution that the poor people are plunged into. While we need to extend the horizons and to deepen the existing rights discourse, while we need perhaps a new generation but a new vision of human rights, because we need to urge the passing of a paradigm that has understood human rights as the rights of the privileged and the rights of the powerful. We need to listen to those voices that have no power. We need to listen to those voices on the edges. The poor and homeless people in the US are people on the edges, because in listening to them, we will be listening to different stories. Who will deny that we need another political imaginary? Ethel spoke of that, another political imagination. Our imaginaries must be different. The new imaginaries cannot have its moorings in our dominant discourses, but must seek to locate itself in a discourse of disobedience, in a discourse of dissent that comes from a deep critique of the different forms of domination and violence in our times. Any new imaginary cannot be linked to systems of violence or to systems of exclusions. For to imagine is not only to see what does not exist or what can exist, but in a very profound way, it is a deep act and a profound act of creativity to see what is. And this in itself requires imaginative leaps, imaginations that we must leap, and this is what we are trying to do in the courts. Perhaps it is this expression of resistance that seeks legitimacy, not by the dominant standards, not by the dominant paradigm of jurisprudence, not by the rule of law, but can begin to draw the contours of a new political imaginary. We hear of so many truth commissions, the public hearings, the people's tribunals, the courts of women. And these are expressions of a new imaginary, refusing that human rights be defined and confined only to that which has been hegemonic, only to the hegemonic discourse and paradigm. These articulations are finding new ways of speaking truth to power, challenging the different notions of power, recognizing that the concepts and categories enshrined in the ideas and institutions of human rights are insufficient to grasp the violence. Yet the courts of women are moving and speaking truth to power are not only doing this. They are not only a critique of power, but I would say that it is all about creating another authority in civil society. The courts of women then are also speaking truth to the powerless, creating other reference points, other sources of inspiration, speaking to the conscience of the world, returning ethics to politics. It's not too hot for you?
People have spoken.
Okay. And this then, friends, if we're looking at it in this way, subsumed cultures, subjugated people, women finding their political voice, this will mean another ethic of dialogue. We need to find new perspectives on the universality of human rights, but this must be done in dialogue with other cultural...
People have spoken.
Okay. And this then, friends, if we're looking at it in this way, subsumed cultures, subjugated people, women finding their political voice, this will mean another ethic of dialogue. We need to find new perspectives on the universality of human rights, but this must be done in dialogue with other cultural perspectives of reality, other notions of development, other notions of democracy, other notions even of dissent, other concepts of power, other concepts of equality. Equality makes us flat and faceless citizens of the nation state. But through its very diverse voices, the courts of women are attempting to speak of equality not in terms of sameness, but in terms of difference. A difference that is rooted in dignity, that comes from depth, that comes from the roots of people who have been dispossessed and denigrated. The courts of women then is a horizon that invites us to think, to feel, to challenge, and Ethel used a wonderful word, to dare. It is an attempt to find a new space for women and men and to infuse the space with a new vision, a new politics. It is a gathering of voices and visions of people in the global south locating itself in a disobedient discourse. In its vision and methodology, the courts of women challenge the dominant ways to knowledge. And I think this is one of the core values of the court, which seeks then not only the kind of rational, juridical approach to violence, but seeks to weave together the 2 points in our consciousness, the rational and the intuitive, the reason and the compassion. These are 2 modes of knowing, 2 modes of knowledge, but we don't need one or the other. We need to combine both. We need to weave the logic with the lyric. And in the courts, you will listen to the testimony in the subjective voice. It is to weave together that subjective voice, the text of the testimony with the objective context and with the objective analysis. And therefore, this weaving together makes us move into deeper layers of knowledge towards creating this new imaginary. Maybe just 1 or 2 more points on this, on the courts, and then I will just go to the end. Because the courts of women, you will see it mimics the court. It's used, we use the word court, but we use it in a very symbolic way. So you have the jury, and you have a very wise jury at this court. You have the women and men bringing testimony. You have the analytical testimony. You have the testimonies of resistance. So it seems to have the structure of the court. But actually it turns the legal processes on its head. It turns it upside down. Because the courts listen to the voices of the survivors, women who bring their personal testimonies, transforming their private, individual pain into public knowledge, giving their privatized, the violence that is privatized, a public face, and therefore a political significance. The courts of women are sacred spaces where women speaking in a language of suffering name the crimes, seek redress, and seek a healing. And the courts, you will find, friends, consciously adopt that which has been pushed away by the legal courts, the vulnerability, the illogic, the fragile, that which has been fragile. The courts consciously adopt this, and the women and men bringing testimony in bearing witness to their experience also bear witness to the fragility of life as it encounters the brutality of violence. The courts offer these spaces for all that is vulnerable. And this then becomes the beginning of drawing the contours of another political imaginary that must bring, I believe, new visions to justice. It speaks to another notion of justice, because the courts of women return through testimony, which is the center of the courts, voice to political vocabulary. It seeks another notion of justice, of a jurisprudence which while bringing individual and collective justice and reparation, will also transform us all. Denise spoke of that, the transformation of all. A jurisprudence that is able to contextualize and to historicize the crimes, moving away from a justice with punishment, a justice of revenge, a retributive justice, to a justice that restores dignity, a justice with healing of individuals, of whole communities. Can the courts of women, and that's the question I ask all of us, can the courts of women, can these sites of pain, can these narratives of destitution, of devastation, can this lead us to a rethinking and to a reimagining of another jurisprudence. Are a step towards the reimagining of this jurisprudence from civil society, in which we are able to creatively connect and deepen our collective insights and understanding of the context in which the text of the everyday of our lives is written. The court's friends invite us to write another history. Just think of something so historical, because the history now will be written by those who have been silenced, by those subjugated, to retell history, to reclaim the power of memory. A counter-hegemonic history, a history from the poor, from the homeless, from the disappearing in the US. One more point. Have patience with me a little. It comes back, okay? Comes back. Women through the courts, women and men, are writing another history, giving private, individual memory its public face, and therefore its political significance, transforming memory and experience into political discourse. The courts of women are communities of the suffering. They are communities of the violated, but they are also, and I want us to remember this, they are also communities of survivors, of knowers, of healers, of seed keepers, of storytellers, of people telling history as a way of reclaiming memory and voice. That is who we are. We are not the people without a name and without a face, but we are people that will write a history because we have held the seeds for a new way. We have been the healers, we have been the storytellers, and it is that which must be heard now. I want to just say this too, that we are the communities of survivors, and it is here in the rootedness of cultures and civilizations and communities, here with people who are on the edges, that we seek the deepening of an alternative discourse. It is here perhaps that the notion of the sacred survives. I'm thinking of Oria, and I'm thinking of Two Bears, and what they led us into a spiritual terrain. Perhaps here it is here that the notion of the sacred survives. Can we return the spiritual to the material? Can we return the ethical to the political? Can we find the feminine thoughts? Can we bring back the sacred to the earth? We need, friends, a different dream, and we need to invite each other to that different dream. I ask for all of us gathered here this morning, and so I'm going to say, we ask. We ask, you and I ask, the powerful of Wall Street. We ask the giant multinationals. We ask the rich in the richest country of the world to look into the eyes of their children. And as they look into the eyes of their children, what stories will they tell them? Will they tell them that once upon a time, not so long ago, and of today, when millions of people in America were living on the streets and in the tent cities, when millions did not have food or health care or housing or work, when millions of poor people are falling through those holes in those safety nets, millions poor, becoming destitute, that they, the powerful, only looked away. And as they look into the eyes of the children, will they tell them that they had no answers and that they accepted only violent ones? What will they tell the children? Perhaps they must listen to other stories. Perhaps they must listen to the stories that we will gather here and listen to in the next few days. Stories that come from the corners of the American street. Stories from the courts of the people. Stories that come from people of conscience all over the world. Stories of courage and commitment, stories of harmony and of hope. Stories of the dignity of a people. Stories that come from children, tortured, terrorized, traumatized. Perhaps they must listen to the children, because the children too come from the stars. They offer a hope. They speak of a justice, a justice that will stop the curse of greed and consumerism and violence and war. Because only justice, as Alice Walker once said, only justice can stop a curse. Thank you.